Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. This week we've got another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is deck number 157 and it's titled Mono Black Pillow Fort. And if you haven't seen the show before, what we're doing is randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com or using a suggested card, working with a budget of $100 or less and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So this week, our random card was suggested to us by Paddywhack, who is a member of the Patreon. If you're interested in joining, you can check out the description in the video. But he suggested to us over on Discord, and the card that he suggested was Witch-King of Angmar. So the Witch-King, which I believe Paddywhack said is his favorite Lord of the Rings character, is 3 black for a 5/3 Wraith Noble. It's got flying. Whenever one or more creatures deal combat damage to you, each opponent sacrifices a creature that dealt combat damage to you this turn, the ring tempts you, and discard a card. Witch-King of Angmar gains indestructible until the end of turn, tap it. So there's a couple of different ways we could build around this card, but obviously the most obvious way to build around this card is by making it the commander of the deck, because since it's a legendary creature, it may as well be the main focus. But there's other things that we can do, and we're really going to try to hone in, as you may have guessed by the deck's title, on its first ability. Whenever one or more creatures deal combat damage to you, each opponent sacrifices a creature that dealt combat damage to you this turn. We want to find ways to prevent our opponents from attacking us, and we want to get a little bit extra value out of that as well. So, with that being said, let's take a quick look at some of the themes for this deck. And we'll start with the actual Pillow Fort theme of the deck, which is preventing creatures from attacking us. And one of the great ways that we can do that in Mono Black is with cards like Hissing Miasma, which is 1 black for an enchantment. Whenever a creature attacks you, its controller loses 1 life. We actually have quite a few of these effects in the deck, trying to take advantage of the fact that Mono Black doesn't get the traditional Pillow Fort style cards, in the sense that our opponents aren't going to have to pay to attack us. We can't really prevent our opponents from attacking us, but we can try to give them reasons not to attack us. So if we can stack enough of these up, maybe our opponents are losing 1, 2, 3 life every single time they attack us with a creature. So if we're playing against a token deck, there's a good chance that they're never going to be able to kill us with attacking without killing themselves first. And if we're playing against someone who has a giant Voltron style creature, then obviously this isn't going to be the best strategy, but it still pushes our opponents to attack someone else and at least maybe leave us for last, giving us a chance to find some way to deal with the threat. Now, this isn't going to be the only way we can win the game, though, because if we're banking on our opponents attacking us and then knocking themselves out by attacking, we're probably just going to sit there while our opponents don't attack us until they find removal. So in that case, we need to lean into punishing our opponents in other ways, and the main way we're going to do that is with card draw. Being able to punish card draw is one of the main things we can do in Mono Black to make sure that we're not drawing out the game too long, but giving our opponents quite the choice of, do they want to attack us and lose life, or do they want to sit there doing nothing and also lose life? So a great example of this is Underworld Dreams, which is black for an enchantment. Whenever an opponent draws a card, Underworld Dreams deals 1 damage to that player. So now, if our opponents decide, hey, I'm just going to sit here and draw cards until I find an answer, they're still slowly dying. So they have to find that answer very quickly. And even still, maybe they remove one of these 2 enchantments. We might have the other one still in play to keep draining out our opponents. And then finally, we get to the last theme of the deck, which is the main way that we are going to advance our own board state, and that is through discard. Because the Witch-King allows us to discard a card for free, it allows us to play a lot of cards that really care about cards being discarded, like Faith of the Devoted, which is 2 and a black for an enchantment. Whenever you cycle or discard a card, you may pay 1. If you do, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. This is a great way to continue punishing our opponents, and we also have a bunch of madness cards to fill the same slot as Faith of the Devoted, ways to really benefit from discarding our own cards and doing other things with them, because as long as our opponents can't really attack us and now they're taking damage for drawing cards, we can start to really advance our own board state and make sure that we're using these discard payoffs to really start to outvalue our opponents and punish pretty much every play they're going to be making in the game, while also preventing them from attacking us or doing any meaningful amounts of damage. So those are our three major themes for this week, and we're going to move next for this deck tech into our key cards. These are the cards that synergize very well with what we're trying to do, and in some cases are value engines or win conditions, but no matter what, they are really the MVPs of this deck. They're the most valuable cards that we've got, not in terms of money, but in terms of playability. So our first key card is going to be Bone Miser. One of the best ways that we can reward ourselves for discarding cards. Bone Miser is 4 and a black for a 4/4 zombie wizard. Whenever you discard a creature card, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Whenever you discard a land card, add black. Whenever you discard a non-creature, non-land card, draw a card. Because of the fact that our commander has this free discard outlet on it, we can essentially trigger whatever mode we want, whenever we want it, provided we of course have the cards in hand to discard, but we most likely will, given the fact that Bone Miser also draws us cards when we discard certain cards. So this is a great way to accrue a ton of value, and also we can discard at instant speed. So we can all of a sudden make a 2/2 zombie to block something, or we can draw cards or make mana to be able to do things that we may not normally be able to do. So Bone Miser is really one of the best cards in the entire deck, and definitely deserves a slot in our key cards. Next up, though, we have Calculating Lich, which is one of the best Pillow Fort style cards in mono black. Even though it doesn't punish our opponents for attacking us, it actually rewards our opponents for attacking each other, because it is 4 black for a 5/5 zombie wizard. It's got menace, and whenever a creature attacks one of your opponents, that player loses 1 life. So this is worded a little bit weirdly, and I did have to read it a couple times to fully understand what it's saying. But essentially, if an opponent is attacked by a creature, that opponent that is being attacked loses a life. So this is where the token strategy really comes in. If our opponents are playing a ton of little tokens that don't have a ton of power, they can still attack each other and essentially do 2 damage instead of 1 for each 1/1 creature that's attacking. Now, like I said, this doesn't prevent our opponents from attacking us. They still can, but the goal here is to give our opponents a reason to attack each other. Essentially, we want them to do the dirty work for us, and then we want to clean up afterwards, because Calculating Lich is a 5/5 with menace. That's pretty difficult to deal with, especially if we can convince our opponents to attack each other and not leave a ton of blockers behind. Now, these two, though, little bit different from our final card. These two want us to be discarding cards and doing damage, and it really just accrues a ton of value in very unique ways. This last card accrues value, but specifically only when we discard cards, and only when we then use them again in the future. So, Currency Converter is our last key card. It is 1 mana for an artifact. Whenever you discard a card, you may exile that card from your graveyard. We can pay 2 and tap it to draw a card, then discard a card, and we can tap it to put a card exiled with Currency Converter into your graveyard. If it's a land, make a treasure. If it's a non-land, make a 2/2 black rogue creature token. So this is very similar to Bone Miser in the sense that we can get value at instant speed. This one doesn't give us the value right away when we discard a card. We have to discard it and then wait a little bit. But it's still going to be incredibly powerful because we can make the 2/2 rogue as a surprise blocker. We can kind of put it into play at the end of someone's turn to get haste, essentially. We can also get treasures that we can save up and use in the future. So it really is a great way to continuously accrue value just because we've discarded some cards. And it may not be the most efficient loot engine, being able to draw and discard for 2 mana, but it is still something we can do if the game starts to stall out, which, considering we're hoping our opponents are unable to attack us, is a distinct possibility. But those are all of our key cards, and the next thing we're going to do with this deck tech is take a look at some cool interactions. These are cards that synergize very well together, and while they may not always be win conditions, they're at least interesting enough that I want to highlight them, because sometimes they're just unique and fun. So, our first cool interaction is going to be between Hellmongrel and Archfiend of Ifnir. So Hellmongrel is 3 and a black for a 4/3 Nightmare dog. Discard a card. Hellmongrel gets +1/+1 until the end of turn, and Madness 2 and a black. And then Archfiend of Ifnir is 3 black for a 5/4 demon. It's got flying. Whenever you cycle or discard another card, put a -1/-1 counter on each creature your opponents control, and it has cycling for 2. So you can kind of get the sense for what we want to be doing here. Hellmongrel is another free discard outlet, so if we don't have the Witch-King, or maybe we want to do this before the Witch-King comes down because it is 4 mana or possibly 3 if we have another discard outlet, we can discard pretty much our entire hand if we want to, and the main reason we would want to do that is because of the Archfiend. If we discard 1 card, all of our opponent's creatures get a -1/-1 counter. If we discard 5 cards, all of our opponent's creatures get 5 -1/-1 counters. That's going to kill most creatures on the board, even if they have Indestructible, even if they have Hexproof, it doesn't matter. It's still going to start to clear the board away. And because we benefit so much from discarding cards in this deck, it really only makes sense to want to do this sometimes, and to use this essentially as a board wipe when we may not have a ton of other board wipes available to us. And then once we've discarded the cards, we may be able to get them out of our graveyard, we may be able to cast them for Madness, or use Currency Converter, or benefit from Bone Miser. So all these different things really synergize together to make a very unique and very powerful set of interactions. But that is only cool interaction number 1. We of course still have one more, and this one is going to be between Dogged Detective and Braid's Arisen Nightmare. So Dogged Detective is 1 and a black for a 2/1 human rogue. Unfortunate that it is not a detective at this point, but when it enters the battlefield, Surveil 2. Whenever an opponent draws their second card each turn, you may return Dogged Detective from your graveyard to your hand. Then, Braid's Arisen Nightmare is 1 black for a 3/3 Nightmare. At the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker. If you do, each opponent may sacrifice a permanent that shares a card type with it. For each opponent who doesn't, that player loses 2 life and you draw a card. Now, we can't force our opponents to draw additional cards, but there's a good chance that throughout the course of the game, people will be drawing more than 1 card a turn. So that will let us get the Dogged Detective back from our hand once it's in the graveyard, meaning we can cast it, and then at the end of turn, sacrifice it to Braids, put it into our graveyard, and then when someone draws 2 cards, we put it back into our hand, cast it again, sacrifice it to Braids, and we can find plenty of ways to really just keep using Braids and Dogged Detective, keep surveilling, keep putting more cards in our graveyard, being able to keep getting it back from our graveyard to our hand, being able to keep drawing cards, making our opponents lose life, or making them sacrifice a creature. Either way, this is just continuous value that only benefits us and slowly hurts our opponents because they're either losing life while we draw a card, or they're sacrificing creatures, neither of which I imagine our opponents want to be doing, unless they're in an aristocrat style deck, in which case you may not want to play the Braids in the first place, but that is not a conversation for this cool interaction section. So I wanted to highlight these 2. I think they're both super cool cards. I think Dogged Detective probably deserves to see a little bit more play than it does right now, but still very powerful nonetheless, specifically in this deck. And so finally, we're going to move into the last piece of our deck tech, which is to be the price of the deck. And this week, the price of our deck came in at $85.13. And I do want to mention, as we start talking about our most expensive card in the deck, that it has actually risen quite a bit since the time of the filming of this video, so there is a chance that the deck price is a little bit higher now. If that's the case, I do apologize, but unfortunately, our most expensive card in the deck is Gix Yawgmoth Praetor at a massive $20.05. I'm pretty sure when I put this card in the deck originally, it was around $5, and then it's slowly going up in price because of its seeing play in Standard, which is starting to become a little bit revitalized. So a little unfortunate that the deck has been slowly creeping up in price after I've already recorded most of the stuff for it and built the deck and everything like that. So right now, I believe the deck is still under $100. If it is not, like I said, I apologize. But I didn't want to change the deck after having already filmed the video because I wanted to make sure that everything in it was as it was during the game because it felt a little bit odd otherwise. With that being said, you may be able to already guess I have already played the game with this deck. It is fun. I won't spoil anything. We'll talk about it in just a minute. However, we do need to talk about Gix because he is good in this deck as well as in Standard. So Gix is 1 black for a 3/3 legendary creature for Phyrexian Praetor. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may pay 1 life. If they do, they draw a card. Then you can pay 7 and discard X cards. Exile the top X cards of target opponent's library. You may play lands and cast spells from among them without paying their mana cost. So essentially, Gix is another way to reward our opponents for attacking each other, being able to let our opponents draw cards, even lose life, which, while not a benefit to them, is a benefit to us, and we're not going to complain about that. But it also lets us draw a ton of cards and then cast our opponent's spells. And the nice thing about Gix's ability is that it discards the cards from our hand, meaning that we can choose what we're discarding to then get some sort of benefit from it, even more than we already are. So that is why Gix is in here despite his massive price tag. I do think that he's definitely worth the inclusion in the deck. However, if you do want to trim the price of the deck, I would recommend cutting him. I also think he's probably going to keep creeping up in price, which is unfortunate because he is very good in this deck. And I've put him in a couple of budget decks before, and unfortunately I think he's a little out of our price range at this point, but still a very good card nonetheless. However, if you're looking to actually increase the price of the deck, I have a suggestion for you there as well, and the card that I would take out to replace for said card. So this week, if you're gonna add a card that's a little bit out of the budget, I would recommend adding Sheoldred Whispering One. And Sheoldred is 5 black for a 6/6 legendary creature, Praetor. It's got Swamp Walk. At the beginning of your upkeep, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player sacrifices a creature. So this is incredibly useful for a couple of reasons. One, most of the time, there's gonna be another player at the table playing a black deck, meaning Swamp Walk is actually pretty effective. It's also going to be making our opponents sacrifice a creature, which is never a bad thing. Yeah, they get to choose what they sacrifice, but it's still something. And the most important reason and why it's here is because we get to return a creature from our graveyard to the battlefield at the start of our upkeep, and since we have free discard outlets in quite a few cards in this deck, including the one in the command zone, we can pick and choose what we discard and when, so our opponents never really know what's going to hit them. We can throw away a giant creature and then immediately get it back in our upkeep, meaning that we get a bit of a surprise factor with it. However, if you are going to put Sheoldred into the deck, then you would have to take a card out, and in this case, the card that I would recommend taking out is Archfiend of Spite. And I know it looks weird suggesting we take out a giant creature to put in something that reanimates giant creatures, but let me explain a little bit, and I suppose let's read the card first. It's 5 black for a 6/6 demon. It's got flying. Whenever a source an opponent controls deals damage to Archfiend of Spite, that source's controller loses that much life unless they sacrifice that many permanents, and it has madness for 3 black. So this does look a little bit weird, right? Like I said, suggesting to take out a giant creature and put in a card that reanimates giant creatures does seem to be a little bit off from what we're trying to do. But as bad as it sounds, I've put Archfiend of Spite in quite a few discard decks over the years, quite a few madness decks over the years, and it just really never does what I want it to do. Every single time I try to madness it, someone typically has a response to exile it or just destroy it because it's not being dealt damage, and I've never actually seen someone lose life or sacrifice permanence to Archfiend of Spite, despite the fact that I've played it in quite a few decks. So because of that, I just don't think the power level is quite what I want it to be, and I'm afraid that it's falling into the pet card category for cards that I like to put into decks. If you personally have had a story behind Archfiend of Spite, I would love to hear it down in the comments, because it's a card that I really want to see work, and I would love to hear its success stories, or I guess maybe it's non-success stories if it worked against you. But either way, let me know, because like I said, I've never quite gotten it to do what I wanted to do, so unfortunately for that reason, I would suggest swapping it out. But that is the only out-of-budget upgrade this week, so before we jump into the game and see what this deck is all about in action, I want to take a second to highlight some ways that you can help support the channel if that's something you're interested in doing. So of course, you can always find us over on Twitter, Reddit, you can send us an email. All of those are great ways to reach out. I'm more than happy to answer any questions, to chat with people. I love interacting with people, talking about Magic, and honestly anything else that you might be interested in. And if you're looking to support the channel, you can always just like the video and subscribe to the channel. And I know a lot of people watch the video that are not subscribed, and that's awesome. I completely understand. But if you wouldn't mind subscribing, I would really appreciate it. And if you want to support even a little bit above and beyond that, you can find us over on Patreon and right here on YouTube as a channel member, where you can join the amazing people listed below, such as William Swiftfoot, Doodle, Eric Way, Jeff Winger, Jeffrey Boos, Salty and Sunshine, Tyler Esme, Sven von Nimwegen, Paddywhack, and Richard. So to all of you, thank you all so much for all of your continued support. And if you'd like to join them, you get amazing access to things like the deck lists a week early. You get to join a Discord channel where we brew up a lot of these decks, and also where we play the games. So if you want to be on the channel playing in the games, that is a great way to do it. You get a random card sent to you every single month. I'm a little bit behind on that right now, but I promise I will get to it. I have the cards ready to go. I'm just terrible at shipping things for some reason. And then you also get the guarantee from me that any card you suggest will be turned into a video for the channel eventually. I, of course, do my best to get to everybody's suggestions, so please do leave them in the comments or send them to me on any number of our social media accounts. But I can't promise to get to them in the same way I can for our patrons and channel members. So, once again, thank you so much to everybody who is a patron and channel member, and of course, thank you so much to everyone who has watched this far into the video. I really do appreciate it. I hope you've liked the deck. But let's see what this deck can actually do in a game. So we are going to jump into a game with 3 opponents. Like I mentioned, I have recorded this in the past. I had to kind of plan this one out in advance. But this one, we are being joined by Josh playing Baba Lysaga Night Witch, Doodle playing Spirit of the Night, and Luke playing Samut, Vizier of Noctamoon. So starting off with Josh and his Baba Lysaga deck, this is pretty much what a Baba Lysaga deck wants to do. He wants to sacrifice a bunch of permanents, specifically making sure to sacrifice 3 or more card types, so that way he can draw a ton of cards, gain a bunch of life, and make his opponents lose a bunch of life. So this deck is filled with cards that continuously get themselves back from the graveyard or let him cast things out of his graveyard, being able to play creatures that are enchantments and creatures that are artifacts to kind of trigger multiple points of Baba Lysaga. So before this, I'd never actually played against a Baba Lysaga deck. I've thought the commander was super cool, and the deck itself is very, very cool. I'm very much looking forward to showcasing it in this game. Next up, we have Doodle playing Spirit of the Night, and this is a deck that has shown up multiple times on the channel before. This is kind of like a mono-black Pestilence style deck. He wants to play a ton of cards that do damage to all the creatures in play, and then since Spirit of the Night has protection from black, it won't take the damage from the Pestilence effects, letting Doodle essentially have a 6/5 flying trample attacking first strike creature that also has haste that is the only thing left standing on the battlefield. So it's a little bit Voltron, a little bit board wipe, but it is a very cool deck, and it gets to use a commander that doesn't really see a ton of love. And then last, we have Luke playing Samut, and this is actually a deck that he received as part of the Reddit Secret Santa budget exchange. So he got this from someone, I don't remember exactly who he said he got it from, but the deck itself was built on a budget, and he made a point to not change a single card in the entire deck. So a very cool gift to get from somebody, but it is all about haste creatures because Samut draws cards when a creature deals damage if it entered this turn. So obviously you got to have some haste, get in there, do some damage, draw some cards. This is a deck that is very much up my alley in terms of playstyle. I love hasty creatures, I love attacking, love drawing cards, of course, who doesn't? So overall, very cool commander, very cool deck, and I think everyone's deck really is a lot of fun, and I'm very excited to show this game to everybody. So before we get into it, let me know down in the comments who you think is going to win. Let me know how you think our deck is going to hold up. But I hope you enjoyed the deck tech. I hope you enjoy the game. I certainly did. And I will talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, Josh goes first, followed by Doodle, Luke, and then myself. On his first turn, Josh plays a forest and casts Exploration, letting him play an additional land each turn, so he then plays a Golgari Rot Farm, returning his forest to his hand. Doodle plays a Cabal Stronghold. Luke plays a mountain. I play a swamp and cast Soul Ring. Josh plays a swamp and a forest, then casts his commander Baba Lysaga Night Witch, allowing him to tap her and sacrifice up to 3 permanents. Then, if there were 3 or more card types among the sacrificed permanents, each of his opponents loses 3 life, he gains 3 life, and draws 3 cards. Then he casts an Ornithopter and passes. Doodle plays a swamp, and then casts Black Blade Reforged. Luke plays a forest and casts Loyal Apprentice, letting him make a 1/1 Thopter token with haste when he goes to combat if he controls his commander. Since it also has haste itself, Luke attacks me for 2 with the Apprentice. On my turn, I play a swamp and then cast Nettling Nuisance, so whenever a fairy I control deals combat damage to a player, that player makes a 4/2 pirate token that can't block and is goaded for the rest of the game. Josh casts Fortitude, enchanting Baba Lysaga, letting him sacrifice a forest to regenerate her, and also returning the enchantment to his hand when it would go to the graveyard. Doodle plays a swamp and casts Vashta Narada, which has Shadow, Indestructible, and gets a +1/+1 counter in each end step if a creature died that turn. Luke plays a forest and casts his commander, Samut, Vizier of Noctamoon, letting him draw a card whenever a creature he controls deals combat damage to a player if that creature entered the battlefield this turn. Moving to combat, Luke makes a Thopter token since he now controls his commander, then he attacks me for 1 with the Thopter, and Doodle for 2 with Samut, drawing 2 cards when they do combat damage. On my turn, I move straight to combat, attacking Luke for 3, letting him make a 4/2 pirate token that can't block and is goaded. Then in my second main phase, I cast Fate Unraveler, doing 1 damage to an opponent whenever they draw a card. In response, Josh activates Baba Lysaga, sacrificing his Ornithopter and Fortitude, returning Fortitude to his hand, drawing 3 cards, gaining 3 life, and making each of his opponents lose 3 life. Then, in the end step, Doodle puts a +1/+1 counter on Vashta Narada. When Josh draws for turn, he loses a life, then he plays a forest and an Evolving Wilds. After that, he cast a Bastion of Remembrance, making a 1/1 human soldier token when it enters, and also making each opponent lose a life while Josh gains a life whenever one of his creatures dies. He recast Fortitude, again enchanting Baba Lysaga, then sacrifices his Evolving Wilds to search his library for a basic land, putting it into play tapped. When Doodle draws for his turn, he loses a life, then he moves to combat, attacking Josh for 2 with Vashta Narada. When Luke draws for turn, he loses a life, then casts Commander Sphere, and plays a Gruul Turf, returning a forest to his hand. Moving to combat, Luke makes another Thopter, then attacks Doodle for 1 with the Thopter that entered this turn, and attacks Josh for 4 with a Pirate. Josh blocks the Pirate with his human token, but before the damage, activates Baba Lysaga to sacrifice the human, a swamp, and Fortitude, returning Fortitude to his hand, drawing 3 cards, gaining 4 life, losing 3 life, and making each opponent lose 4 life. Then damage happens with Doodle taking 1, while Luke draws a card and loses a life. Then in the second main phase, Luke casts Nature's Claim, destroying Bastion of Remembrance, letting Josh gain 4 life, and at the end of turn, Doodle puts another counter on Vashta Narada. Once again, I move straight to combat on my turn, attacking Josh for 3 with Nettling Nuisance, letting him make a Pirate token. When Josh draws for turn, he loses a life, then casts Conduit of Worlds, letting him play lands from his graveyard, and it can also be tapped to let him cast a non-land permanent from his graveyard, but only if it's the only spell he casts this turn. This lets him play both the Swamp and Evolving Wilds in his graveyard, and after that he casts Skull Clamp and equips it to the Pirate token, giving it +1/-1, and letting Josh draw 2 cards when it dies. He then goes to combat, attacking Doodle for 5 with the Pirate, and at the end of turn, sacrifices the Evolving Wilds to search his library for a basic land, putting it into play tapped. When Doodle draws for turn, he loses a life, then attacks Josh for 3 with Vashta Narada before passing, unfortunately still missing his 4th land. When Luke draws for turn, he loses a life, then plays a forest and casts Hellrider, doing 1 damage to an opponent whenever he attacks them with a creature. He also casts Kenrith's Transformation, enchanting Baba Lysaga, turning it into a 3/3 elk with no abilities, and letting Luke draw a card and lose a life. When he moves to combat, Luke makes another Thopter token, then attacks Josh for 7 with a Pirate and 3 Thopters, doing an additional 4 damage with Hellrider, attacks Doodle for 5 with Hellrider and Samut, doing an additional 2 damage, and attacks me for 2 with Loyal Apprentice, doing 1 damage to me. I block the Apprentice with Fate Unraveler, and Josh blocks the Pirate with Baba Lysaga, killing every creature except the Unraveler, and ends with Josh taking 3, Doodle taking 5, and I take no damage while Luke draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. On my turn, I cast Hellmongrel, which lets me discard a card to give it +1/+1 until the end of turn. I then attack Josh for 3, letting him make another Pirate token that can't block and is goaded. When Josh draws for turn, he loses a life, then casts Tireless Provisioner, letting him make a food or a treasure token whenever he plays a land. He then plays Evolving Wilds from his graveyard and sacrifices it twice, letting him search his library for 2 total basic lands, putting them into play tapped and making 4 treasures. After that, he casts Bloodletter of Aclazotz, doubling the life his opponents would lose on his turn. He moves to combat, attacking Luke with both of his pirates for 9, but Luke blocks 5 of it with Samut, killing the Skull-Clamped pirate, letting Josh draw 2 cards, lose 2 life, and Luke takes a total of 8 because of the Bloodletter. Then, at the end of turn, Doodle puts a counter on Vashta Narada. When Doodle draws for turn, he loses a life, and casts Thought Vessel, gaining no maximum hand size, then attacks me for 5 with Vashta Narada. When Luke draws for his turn, he loses a life, then plays a mountain, and casts Xenagos the Reveler. After that, he casts Ruby, Daring Tracker, and activates Xenagos' +1 ability to make 6 mana in any combination of red and or green, since he controls 6 creatures. This lets him cast Felden of the Third Path, and also lets him cast Bedlam, preventing creatures from blocking. After that, he moves to combat, attacking Josh with all of his creatures, doing 6 damage immediately thanks to the Hellrider, but before the blocks, Josh casts Terra Sunder, exiling Bedlam so that he can block Hellrider and Ruby, killing Ruby and only taking 5 damage. Then at the end of turn, Doodle puts another counter on Vashta Narada. On my turn, I play a Gaia Reach Sanitarium, and attack Doodle for 3 with Nettling Nuisance, letting him make a pirate token that can't block and is goated. When Josh draws for turn, he loses a life. Then he plays a Dark Boar Pathway, making a treasure, plays a forest from his graveyard, making another treasure, and casts Tyvar Jubilant Brawler. He then recasts his commander, Babala Saga, and also recasts Fortitude, enchanting Babala Saga. After that, he casts Thousand Year Elixir, letting his creatures tap as though they have haste, and letting him pay 1 and tap the elixir to untap target creature. He equips the Skull Clamp to the Bloodletter of Aclazotz, giving it +1/-1 and letting Josh draw 2 cards when it dies. This lets him attack me for 6 with the Bloodletter and Doodle for 8 with a Pirate. Then, in his second main phase, Josh activates Babala Saga, sacrificing Fortitude, a forest, and his Pirate token to gain 3 life, make each opponent lose 6 life, and draw 3 cards. In response, I discard Curse of Fool's Wisdom to Hellmongrel, giving it +1/+1 and letting me cast the curse for its madness cost, enchanting Josh so whenever he draws a card, he loses 2 life and I gain 2 life. Still in response, Josh activates Elixir of Immortality to untap Babala Saga, and immediately activates her again, sacrificing a forest, the Provisioner, and the Elixir to draw 3 cards, gain 3 life, lose 3 life, and make each opponent lose 6 life, knocking Doodle out of the game. Then the curse resolves, and finally the original Babala Saga trigger resolves, letting Josh gain 3 life, draw 6 cards, lose 9 life while Luke and I lose 6 life, but I also gain 6 life thanks to the curse. After all that is resolved, Josh activates Tyvar's +1 ability to untap the Bloodletter. When Luke draws for turn, he loses a life, then plays a Kessig Wolf Run, and activates Felden, making a token copy of the Rampaging Geoderm in his graveyard. Then Luke casts a Beast Within, destroying Josh's Bloodletter and letting him draw 2 cards. Unfortunately for Josh, this means that I gain 4 life while he loses 6, knocking him out of the game. Finally, Luke activates Xenagos' +1 ability to make 7 mana, which he's able to pay into Kessig Wolf Run, activating it to give one of his Thopters +6/+0 and trample until the end of turn, letting him attack me with all of his creatures, doing 6 damage with Hellrider, and even when I block as much as I can, I still take 12, getting knocked out and winning Luke the game. Alright, so that was a sweet game. Unfortunately, both of the mono-black decks at the table, us and Doodle, got a little bit trapped on mana. We never got above 5 mana, which is unfortunate, and Doodle never got above 4, so not quite where we wanted to be in terms of mana production and gameplay-wise, but I still think we held our own, and right at the end of the game, we were very, very close to actually winning because of all of our, I don't want to say prison effects, but our pillow fort-ish decks are cards that are kind of punishing our opponents for drawing cards and preventing them from attacking or forcing them to attack in the case of the Nettling Nuisance. So I do think our deck performed very well. I think that it obviously would have performed better had we found some more lands, but I kept a very greedy hand of 2 lands and a Soul Ring because I'm a monster of a person, so, you know, sometimes you just see the shiny Soul Ring and can't say no. Moving around the table, though, Josh's Babala Saga deck was very, very cool. It definitely performed a lot better than I expected. I thought he might struggle sometimes to get the permanent types he needed to be able to actually trigger Babala Saga, but he pretty consistently had that every single turn, and it was kind of interesting to see how much the negative effects from drawing cards really hindered him specifically. I think that if I hadn't had the ways to make him lose life for drawing cards, I do think he probably could have run away with the game and drawn so many cards and gained so much life that there wasn't much the rest of us were gonna be able to do. So hopefully we get to see Babala Saga again in the future sometime. And then Doodle, really unfortunate that he got stuck on so few lands. He was able to get the Vashta Narada down and do a ton of damage with it and get it pretty big throughout the course of the game. But unfortunately, that's kind of all that he did. Now, we've seen Soul of the Night in the past, so we know that it is an incredibly powerful deck and very brutal to play against if you're running creature strategies. But hopefully we'll get to see it come back in the future to kind of revitalize a little bit of what we see from Spirit of the Night. And then finally, last but not least, we've got to talk about our winner, Luke. Very cool to see Luke win with an unmodified gift deck. It's always a ton of fun getting to play a deck that someone else made for you, because you just kind of get to see what other people think and what other people's thought processes are. And I know that he had a lot of fun with the deck. I know that the mana base was a little bit off at the very beginning. He struggled to find some dual lands, but he eventually got there, I believe, drawing the one dual land in the entire deck, which was the bounce land. So very, very cool. And definitely very impressive. I didn't think the haste ability was going to come into play as much as it did, and I think Samut is an incredibly powerful commander. Being able to keep a full group of 7 cards in a Gruul aggro deck was very, very powerful. So very cool, very good deck, very good game. I really enjoyed it. I hope you all did. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of the deck and the game. Maybe there's cards you want to see turned into decks and videos in the future. If so, please do let me know. But thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.